Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post. My guest today is director DJ Caruso. He is behind the brand new biblical epic Mary, hitting Netflix on December 6th. I haven't really seen the nativity story from Mary's perspective like this before. So talk to me about the inception of this movie and why you wanted to tell the nativity from her perspective specifically.
Well, yeah, that's an excellent point. I had felt that cinematically and story-wise, that Mary's story was slightly underappreciated, right? I mean, obviously she delivered the greatest gift to the world and the greatest gift that we've ever gotten, but you never really cinematically have ever seen it just from her perspective and what was it like to be her, this young woman, and what was she's going through. And I also felt like there was a real need to sort of humanize her journey so you can feel what it felt like with her and you can relate to her. The audience can relate to her. Our daughters can relate to her. Everyone can relate to what she was going through because a lot of what Mary went through the contemporary world is sort of throwing us those same curveballs here today, right? And I think it was important to really humanize her and to take her story and to say, look, we know this story, but when you see it from her perspective and from her eyes, and when the audience is kind of hanging on to her and seeing this and the decisions and the apprehensions and the fears and her family drama and what her relationship could have been like with Joseph, I just felt it was really important to sort of pay homage and honor to her by telling her story in a real human way, so people can relate to her and even have a deeper relationship with her.
How did you balance portraying her as both a holy figure, but also a young woman facing these immense challenges? Because you do show just how harrowing her journey was, from shunning of her community to childbirth to the violence that she experienced after. Talk about finding that balance.
I think Noah was so instrumental in helping find that balance, but I think you really have to, cinematically, you have to, from the narrative drive, you have to approach the scene from a very humanistic point of view. Obviously, amazing things happen to this young woman, and from the visit of Angel Gabriel into understanding how her birth came about. But at the same time, the human world, the nature of man, and all those things that are happening in this world are still forces that are against her. She's got to swim upstream. She has to fight all the fights. When she accepts the fiat, which I think is such an amazing moment for all of us, and says like, "Let it be done to me, like let it be me." She turns her life over to the Lord and says, "You're in my heart forever. I'm yours." Um, and then her life, it doesn't get much easier, does it? It really doesn't get much easier. There's always going to be a struggle and a fight to do something amazing. And I think that's a really strong message. So that's the human side of what she had to deal with. And I think obviously the grace and the beauty and the nature and the birth of Christ, all of the divinity sort of is there, but I really wanted to blend the human struggle with all that. And I think it was a fine line, but I think when you take each scene by scene, how would you approach this? And Noah and I just kind of broke it down and went through it. And I think we created a really nice balance.
So you do show the angel Gabriel, but there's also an interesting scene with Lucifer. So you're showing sort of this spiritual warfare that occurred. Why was it important to you to show this? Because I think spiritual warfare isn't something that a lot of people are comfortable with tackling, much less on screen.
Yeah, well, I think the spiritual warfare is something we all battle with every day. And I think it was important to illustrate that, particularly when you can see the sort of the spiritual warfare that's happening to Mary and what's going on, is Lucifer is like what it is like it isn't in for us today. It's sort of like, why do you need to suffer? Just take the easy way out. Just all that temptation of just saying, why am I going to do all this if it's going to cause me so much pain? And obviously, through the suffering and pain is how we grow and how we get closer to God. But there's always that temptation there to just not do it and to just say, why do I have to go through this? And so I think that battle, that spiritual warfare is something that is happening in all of our lives every day. And again, in humanizing Mary, I wanted to bring that in so you can see there always is a voice trying to get you to counter and always trying to get you to do what isn't right, even if it's the easy way. So for me, it was really important to sort of bring that element into the story.
So you have five kids, you are a person of faith. How did these elements influence the way you told Mary's story?
Well, I think it is the fabric. It's in my DNA. It is who I am. And we're very, we're a faithful family, and we've all been together and gone to church and the Jesuit schools, the Catholic schools, and all that stuff. And my wife is very spiritual. So I I was very good friends with Bishop David O'Connell, and he was really influential in talking about how important Mary is in our lives. And so it sort of kind of was in the last 4 or 5 years, we sort of really started to focus on Mary and her story. And I think it just, when you're a spiritual person or you're a person of faith, it just informs you in so many different ways. And even in the movies that I've made and directed that aren't necessarily on this theme or in these themes, you can feel the spirituality and you can feel sort of the God in these characters and in everything that I'm doing. It's always that element of Christ in your heart is always present. It might not always be overt and out there in the open, but it's in everything that I do. So it affects every decision I make.
So this movie does take some creative liberties with the biblical account. What is your response to those who will take issue with some of the scenes that do diverge from the biblical text?
Well, I think that there's not a lot of material on our Holy Mother and on Mary in the Bible. There's very few texts, you know. So I mean, you have Matthew, you have Luke, you have some other references, but so what it is I think you have to, as a filmmaker, stay true to the narrative of what the framework of the biblical story is. And then you have to fill in these voids cinematically with things that are thematically correct, that honor the spirit of what Mary is going through. And I always say, for example, if Herod was sending the Roman soldiers out to find the Messiah and to destroy this child and to destroy these children, what would it be like for any mother to have to protect your child, right? And here we are with Mary. So how do we experience that? And we don't know on their way to Egypt how many times they could have been encountered because we don't know. It's not in the Bible. So filling all these things in that can make the movie emotional, can get you, you know, sort of sitting at the edge of your seat and still staying true to the framework of the biblical story was very vital and very important to me. It's how we fill the voids. And, you know, Joseph taking some, you know, Joseph is a silent participant in the gospel. He doesn't have a word. Joseph doesn't say a word, like not a word. So how do you give Joseph a voice, and how do you make him vital, and how do you make him important? And I feel like that is something where you can take liberty as long as you're being respectful to the text and everything, because Joseph needed a voice, and as a filmmaker, I have to give him a voice.
Mm-hmm. Talk about, I know you mentioned that you used pastors and theologians and biblical scholars to, ensure biblical accuracy to kind of inform this film. Talk a little bit about the research that you did for this film.
Well, I did a lot of research because once you kind of you dive into the story, and for me personally, I'd always known that like Saint Joachim or Joachim and Anne were Mary's parents, and so we kind of celebrate who they are and what they've done. But I didn't really know how I knew that story. I don't know if it was sort of passed along through years, or you go to Bible school or Bible study and you hear things, and you go through Catholic schools or all the schools. So I was like, how do I know this? Like, why do I know who Mary's parents are if there's nothing in the canonized text about it? So I did kind of went off and read sort of the infancy gospel of James that kind of told Mary's story that wasn't in the canonized scripture. Josephus was a historian who gave me a lot of the stuff about Herod and what was happening in those times. I don't believe there's a mention of Mary particularly in there, but he does mention Christ and the birth of Christ. So I kind of took all those things and worked with some biblical scholars that really know the text and really can break it down. And then also Bishop David O'Connell, who was a good friend of mine, was sort of what I called my Mary expert about everything about Mary. There isn't anything he didn't know about Mary, so I would always go to him and talk to him. So it was a combination of all those elements that helped us shape the screenplay and find the right balance.
To talk about releasing this movie ahead of the Christmas season, it's the birth of Jesus. Let's talk about sort of the significance of releasing this movie now.
Well, I think it's beautiful. You know, I always thought when we were making the film, oh, wouldn't it be nice if it was maybe Easter or Mother's Day or something around this thing? But then there's like, obviously Christmas is like the perfect time for this movie. Because I think everyone's like hearts sort of open up, and everyone seems to sort of like want to be accepting of something so beautiful in the message. And I think the idea too is, yeah, this is the nativity story. You know, we tell Mary's story prior to all that, and we get to the nativity story. So there's a wonderful Christmas message. Obviously, it's the birth of Christ, and to show that, you know, how difficult it really was to get to that point and to get to the birth of Christ, and then to ultimately deliver him back to the temple, which I think is so beautiful. I think it's a great time because I think families can get around and watch it together and just sort of, you know, it's a great way to spend 2 hours, and it's a great way to sort of sort of reset and refresh yourself and get acquainted to the story that you know, but also is telling you it in sort of from a different point of view and a different perspective. So I think it's wonderful that it's coming out at Christmas.
Well, and you've got some real star power in the film. You've got, I mean, Anthony Hopkins. What was that like getting him to sign on to portray King Herod? I mean, that's a huge deal.
It is a huge deal. Yeah, it's really great because he's one of the goats, and you always dream that you get to direct all these great people. I've been very fortunate in my life from the Al Pacinos to the Angelina Jolies to the Matthew McConaughey's. I've been able, and so I get Sir Anthony Hopkins here, and it was wonderful. So yeah, I had to pinch myself because he's really, really a sweet, sweet, hardworking man. He's 86 years old, and I'm telling you, he works harder than anybody I've ever seen. We would have Zooms like this and kind of go over the character and write down ideas and do certain things. And you can see why he is so good because he does all of his homework and breaks down his character. And, as you can tell, you've seen the film, he gave King Herod this slight bit of regret and this little connection of sort of understanding that what Mary was bringing to the world was something special. And in a way, he's almost looking for the Messiah, maybe not to destroy the Messiah, but looking for the Messiah for another reason, like that he doesn't even know what it is. And so Sir Anthony brought that to the character, and it was really just wonderful to see his process, how he works, and how, what a professional. And when I say he's 86 years old, when he was on the set, the energy level was up here because he just loves what he's doing. He loves it. That's where he belongs.
Well, you can tell. I mean, you can tell that he just thoroughly enjoying playing this character, which is really cool to see. So,
Mhm.
as you made this movie, as you researched the life of Mary, the biblical account, how were you impacted personally? Because when you're immersing yourself in scripture that much, you can't leave unchanged. You can't leave the same person you were before.
No, that's so true. It's very astute that you say that. I always have the moment for me in this film that really it all kind of came down to was when Gabriel comes to visit Mary and he explains to her what's happening and what she's going to do. And she says it's her fiat when she accepts it. And she says, like, let it be me, let it be done to me. I was operating one of the cameras and I just started to bawl. I couldn't stop crying. I just couldn't stop crying. And I realized then, like, oh my goodness, like how powerful that is. I know it's like we take it for granted in the scriptures, but like that's what we all need to do, right? We all need to say, like, let it be me. I'm going to give it to you, and you take me, and I will go wherever you lead me. And it's really hard to do that, right? It's really difficult to do that. And when Mary did that, and when that happened in that scene, to me, that was my revelation. That's why I made the movie. I realized, like, at that moment, that's for me personally why I made that movie, because it was such an important and vital, and it pierced my heart. It was such a beautiful moment, and I realized, like, we're going through all these things today in this world. It's full of chaos. There's a lot of beauty, but we all have to decide, like, what are we going to do? Are we going to let, like, man's nature and all these things take us this way, or are we going to follow God's grace? And if we can follow God's grace, it might not always be easy, but that's what we need to do. And that moment for me was really, that struck me as like the most important moment in the movie for me, cinematically and personally.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, DJ, I want to get your thoughts on this. We're seeing a huge surge in the popularity of these biblical epics from, The Chosen to this movie to this Amazon show about David that's coming out. What do you think
Yes.
is driving such an interest in these stories? Because it's really been within the last 5 years that we're seeing this mass explosion.
Well, I think what's wonderful is that the business or Hollywood is understanding the power of these stories and the audiences that are there for these stories. And also, the most important thing for me personally is whether it's the King David series, because I read that script. John Aaron's a really good friend of mine, and it's really good stuff. Like, it's really good stuff. And but cinematically, like, we're making films, like, we're making beautiful, beautiful films, and The Chosen does such a great job on a weekly basis to sort of elevate the genre and to say, like, you don't have to just say, here's a message movie, which is great. There's a lot of message movies, but they're not really shot well, and they're just sort of presented like this is like cinema. Like, if we're going to make something for the Lord, like, why not make it the best you possibly can? And also knowing that Hollywood's now accepting and understands the vitality of this audience and the hunger of this audience to see really good stuff. it's a really, really good time. And I think that's what's happened over the past 5 years. And I think it's going to continue to grow.
Well, what does it mean to you to get a movie like this on Netflix, which is one of the biggest streaming platforms out there right now?
Oh, it's so important. I mean, knowing that, I think it's like 45 different languages. The movie goes all over the world. There's, potential for hundreds of millions of people to see the film and to be touched and moved by the film. It's amazing to me. It's so powerful. Could not be happier that this particular movie is on Netflix. It's just, to me, it's also really sort of a big step forward for them to say, like, we're going to give you this. This is a Netflix original movie, and we want you to see this and we want you to love it. It's really amazing to have all that behind you. And they've been a fantastic company to work with.
Yeah. Okay, so we're about 2 weeks out before the movie releases. What's your hope for Mary? What do you want audiences to take away from this movie?
I just want them to be inspired by the sacrifices and by the challenges that she had to overcome, and to see like what amazing good could come out of making those sacrifices and giving it over, and also saying, well, wow, I never really thought of her as a young woman, who was ostracized. I never really thought about her as a young woman who like had to have a husband that she didn't really know and had to arrange like all the things that Mary went through and all of the sacrifice that she made. I want people to get a lot closer to her. I want them to say like, she could be my friend. If you're a certain, belief, if you're a Catholic, I want you to pray to her. If you're probably, it doesn't really matter. I just want everyone to love and appreciate her more, and to say like she brought so much light into this world. That's my hope. I hope that's what gets out there.